Greetings to all. I'm glad that you're with me again today as we continue our studies of the book of Genesis, and particularly looking at the life of Joseph. I mentioned last week that we were coming to the end of the story of Joseph and soon to the end of the story of Genesis itself. But today we are in Genesis chapter 41 and 42. And I want to remind you that from Genesis chapter 42 through to Genesis 46, it's all about Joseph and his family being reconciled together. It's a family story, and it's put into a wider history because, of course, the book of Genesis fits into a wider history about the salvation of the world. But it's still made up of ordinary people with ordinary life experiences. And these life experiences have a lot to teach us, because God, as he is working out his great plans for the world's salvation, also teaches us about how to live life in our fallen world. And also teaches us how to cope and to see things from the point of view of being the people of God. So I'm calling this section of the book of Genesis Dealing with the Past. And today we're only going to have a look at chapter 42, and we'll have to look at it in summary form because it's very long. So I'll read a few verses to you, and we'll see this as part one of the little series concerning this whole matter of family reconciliation. And we'll see it from the book of Genesis and see it from God's point of view and how it works out in the life of Joseph. So in chapter 42 of Genesis, verse 1, we read, "When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you look at one another?' And he said, 'Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die.' So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him." So he had a kind of a suspicion, you see, that they had done something to Joseph. "Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and he was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. 'Where do you come from?' he said. And they said, 'From the land of Canaan to buy food.' And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. And he said to them, 'You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land.' They said to him, 'No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies.' And he said to them, 'No, it is the nakedness of the land you have come to see.'" And so I'll leave it there for the time being, because the narrative continues for quite a long time, and there'll be no time for us to make any comments at all. So what I want to do is just remind you again that at this point in the story, Joseph was living apart from his family, and his family obviously apart from him. And this was due in part to the hatred and jealousy that was partly inspired by Jacob, the father of the family, favoring Joseph over the rest of the children. There was one younger brother, Benjamin, that we read about in Genesis, and those two boys came from the same mother, but the other brothers came from different mothers. And so there was this jealousy and this hatred that had accrued in the family amongst the brothers, and as a result, Joseph, as you remember, was sold as a slave to traders who went down to Egypt, and Joseph suffered many things in Egypt before he became who he was now at this point in the story. He was, in fact, the ruler of Egypt in place of Pharaoh, and he was doing Pharaoh's business and dealing with the nations of the world during a time of great famine, when Egypt itself had great plenty and was selling their food to the nations of the world. And during this period of time, we now begin to see the beginnings of a reconciliation between the families coming back together again, a reconnecting of the families. And I want to pause for a moment to say that when we talk about reconciliation or families coming together again, or somehow putting the past behind us, there are no end of philosophers and no end of counselors and no end of Bible teachers who will tell you how to do it. And a lot of them have got a lot of good things to say and are worth listening to, while a lot is not worth much at all. And so what I'm doing today is not giving you any of my own opinions, but rather I want to point out to you what happened in the scriptures between Joseph and his family, and just draw some lessons out of that which may apply to you or your friends or someone that you know who's trying very hard to deal with their past at this point in time. And remembering at the background, behind the theme of dealing with the past, there's the larger theme of Genesis playing a role in the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, who would deal with the past of all of us who put their faith and trust in him. But for now, it is Joseph and his brothers and his family that we are concerned about. So the first thing I want to point out to you from that short reading that I read to you from Genesis chapter 42 is that sometimes to initiate some form of reconciliation between families, God sends some sort of event into the family's life. It may be a family disaster, it may be a family illness, it may be a family celebration of some sort, but something comes in that no one expected, and suddenly the family is thrown together again. This is what happened with Joseph and his brothers. And in this case, God sent a famine upon the land, and had organized it in such a way through his mighty sovereign power that the land of Egypt, where Joseph was the land that had plenty, and the land where his brothers were, the land of Canaan, had nothing. And so in this way now, a long time after the events of him being sold off as a slave, suddenly these brothers are confronted with the need to go to Egypt to buy grain so that their family won't starve. Now, it may be that in your own particular circumstances or the circumstances of someone you know, something like this is happening. It may not be a famine, but it may be some other trouble, some other disaster, triple disaster maybe, or a divorce, or some other thing that has happened within the family that has caused big ructions. And somehow or other, you've got to get together to sort this out. And so God deals with us in these ways to bring us together. Of course, for many people, it's much easier to form reconciliations because there may be different kinds of people. They may have a different temperament, or there may not be such a big breach in the family, or they may have some spiritual background and some knowledge of what it means to be answerable to God. So God sometimes uses disaster and trouble to produce a final goodness in our family. Do you see that? Because you tend, and I tend, we all tend, when trouble comes to us, to say, why is God, the God who we have no time for, the God we don't normally refer to, the God who we feel we owe nothing to, yet we feel he owes us everything. Why does this God allow this to happen to me if he's supposed to be a God of love? And you don't see that behind all of these things, this great creator of the universe, who can do what he likes with the creatures whom he created, is nevertheless moving things so that a greater good will come out of the sadnesses, the destruction, and all the grief that you may have suffered in your own life, and all the regrets you may have in your own life. And under God sent a famine, in terms of Joseph, we can put almost any one of the troubles that we encounter in life. Next thing I want to point out to you is this, that according to this account, there can be no form of reconciliation by sending lawyers' letters or messages over the media to our friends or loved ones who are estranged from us. No, there's got to be some sort of face-to-face meeting with the one who's been betrayed or hurt by our actions or in the course of whatever happened in our lives. And so this meeting takes place in verses 6 to 10. There is this meeting between Joseph and his brothers who have come seeking for wheat. And Joseph is the one who deals with them personally. It's a very, very great privilege to have a person of Joseph's stature at that time to deal with a simple request for selling meat. But it so happens that God works it out that Joseph deals with his family himself on this occasion. And immediately Joseph recognizes who they were. These are the ones who had betrayed him. Now, you know, when you meet somebody who has betrayed you or meet someone who has hurt you, there is an immediate sense of shock and sometimes a sense of being affronted. What are they doing here? How did I get to meet them? But Joseph meets them, recognizes them, and keeps his cool. And furthermore, we are told in verse 9 of this chapter that Joseph remembered the dreams that he had had about them, bowing down to him, asking for grain. Brings back memories when you meet the persons that you've been estranged from. Lots of things have happened. Water has passed under the bridge. There are things that you remember from the past that you wish you hadn't said or done or wish hadn't happened. All these things have got to be faced and put away in a proper way. And Joseph immediately accuses them of having a false motive in coming into Egypt. And so immediately there is a sense of anger and there is a sense of wanting to get my own back on you all. But that's not the cause at all with Joseph. He deals harshly with them, but not because he wants to get his own back, which brings us to the third thing I want to talk to you about regarding this meeting of reconciliation. And that is that Joseph wants to know what's going back at home. Is his old father still alive, and is his younger brother Benjamin still alive? But if he asked that immediately, he would just give himself away. He doesn't want to do that just yet because there's other things that have got to be dealt with. So he assumes a posture of anger toward his brothers, an accusation that they are spies. And you can read about that continuing from verses 18 to 20. And they are protesting, no, but we are not spies. We are honest people. We've just come simply to buy grain. And Joseph pretends not to believe them so that he can put them in an awkward position until confessions are wringed from them and until they tell the truth about where their father is, their brother is. Joseph has got to press the point home so that true reconciliation can take place. Now, the fourth thing that happens now in this process of reconciliation, you'll read about in verses 21 to 25 of chapter 42 of Genesis. And that is that the brothers are shaken and shocked by Joseph's dealings with them. They have not yet recognized him. They don't know who he is. He's adopted a kind of an Egyptian persona. Perhaps looks like an Egyptian and dressed like one, and in every way they do not recognize him. And they begin to confess to each other the wrong that they'd done to Joseph 20 years earlier. And they are now full of contrition and full of regret and full of fear about what they had done to their brother. And they're speaking in their own Hebrew language to each other. They're talking to each other about their wrong deeds. They are confessing their deeds and of sin and violence that they'd committed against their brother. What they don't know is that Joseph, who could speak and understand Hebrew, is listening to them. And so we read that Joseph wept because he heard them. And you know, friends, when there is reconciliation in a family, there is need for confession of wrongdoing. You've got to go over that ground. You can't just sweep it under the carpet. You've got to confess it. And it may be a very emotional time for some people who are involved in whatever the problem may be. In this case, Joseph himself, Joseph, this great prince of Egypt, Joseph, who was actually giving the grain to them, Joseph, who was saving their lives, filled with emotion, filled with sadness over all that had happened in the past. He remembers them, he listens to their accusation, and he's filled with emotion. And then he announces something that is very hard for them to do. They cannot come back for any more wheat unless they bring their youngest brother Benjamin with them. Now this put them in a totally difficult situation, because Jacob would never allow his youngest son to come with him. But by making this statement, Joseph was putting them entirely in his power. There was no other place to get wheat. There was nowhere else they could go to when their wheat ran out and they needed more and they had to come back again. You've got to bring your brother with you, he said. It's a very cunning act, you see, because what he is doing is bringing them step by step to face not only their wrongdoing, but to bring back the people whom he had missed in his life, these long years away from home, to see how they were, his younger brother whom he loved, his father who was now very aged. He wants to see them. He wants to make sure that all is well. So step by step he's leading them along the route of this act of reconstructing their personalities and their family life again and reconnecting again. And so fifthly and finally, I want to point out to you that at this point of the story of reconciliation, Joseph sends them back home. He says, go back home. So they go home. And on their way home, they find out that the money that they paid for the wheat has been left in their returned to them in their wheat bags. They don't know what to make of it. And Joseph is slowly putting the pressure on them so that they're entirely under his power, so that they will do what he wants them to do and bring back his family to him again. So when they get home, they report to their father Jacob, who's very old at this point in time. They've had a very unpleasant time in Egypt. They have to tell him. They're frightened by this Pharaoh who's spoken so harshly to them. They're frightened by the fact that he's put their money back in their bags again, almost like making them frauds. How are they ever going to go back to him again? And they can only go back if they bring the child, or the young man now, Benjamin, with them. And Jacob, without even hesitation, says, no way. You're not taking him with you. He's the last of my children, my youngest. He reminds me of my wife. He reminds me of Joseph. And you will not bring my heirs down to the grave by taking him with you, just to die on the way or in Egypt. So they were stuck. And the process of reconciliation ends there in chapter 42. We'll pick it up again next week in chapter 43, and I hope that you'll join me. But I do want to leave 2 points with you before we sign off today. The first, in verse 18, Joseph makes this statement, I fear God. And the second is in verse 28, it's when the brothers say, what is this that God has done to us? So God is not left out of this picture. Somewhere in all of this mess, God is working. The Pharaoh's assistant, the Pharaoh's prime minister, fears God. And these brothers have been taught to fear God, and they don't know what God is doing with them, just like you may not know, and I may not know at times. What is God doing with us? Why all this confusion in our lives? But the one thing we do find out from this chapter is that behind it all, there is a great God at work. And this great God is at work to do something great and good that will result in salvation and forgiveness for all people. And I hope that you'll stay with me as we continue this story next week.